in Genesis chapter 34. Within the Jacob narratives, this chapter balances chapter 26. In that chapter, there is a record of Isaac, the father of Jacob, deceiving the tribes of Canaan. And balancing that chapter is this chapter of Jacob's family deceiving the tribes of Canaan. The main subject of this chapter is Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, identified in verse 1 as the daughter of Leah, an unusual expression. She is the main subject of this chapter, although she never speaks. A dark chapter then, a chapter in which God's name is never mentioned, nor is prayer, nor is the promises that we've been thinking of in the life of Jacob, nor the blessings which he received. There's a lot of sin in this chapter. And yet, as we journey through the dark sins, highlighting 3 of them this evening, hold on to this redemptive phrase in verse 25. On the 3rd day. We are following the grammatical emphasis went out, which occurs 4 times in the chapter, and we consider the different aspects of sin in relation to those 4 grammatical terms. Firstly, then, thinking of the sin of desire. Secondly, a double point, the sin of deceit, twice, once by Hamor, then the other time by the sons of Jacob. And then thirdly, the sin of destruction. Think of the sin of desire in verses 1 to 5. In verse 1 we read, Dinah went out. Dinah, Leah's daughter, Jacob's daughter, was probably around 15 years of age. No doubt she had her mother's beauty. And at that age of inquisitiveness, she went out to explore the local scene. Now, this term went out is significant. It's significant in the life of Moses in Exodus chapter 3. You remember, he was brought up in the palace, but then in a good way, he went out, and it says it in verse 11 and in verse 13 of Exodus chapter 3. He went out with compassion and interest and in a sense of duty and care for his fellow people. But here it's used in a bad sense. Dinah, the teenager, went out from the protection of the camp of Jacob, went out, as the phrase here says, a loaded phrase, to the woman of the land. This is a phrase that we've encountered before, used by Rebekah in chapter 27. You remember that Rebekah did not want Jacob marrying one of the women of the land. Perhaps she had observed them, their dress, their behavior, their morals, their manners, their religion, and she concluded that they would not be good for Jacob. But here is Dinah, the teenager, leaving the protection of the camp of Jacob and going out to the woman of the land. And as we read this, we're saying to ourselves, this is not going to end well. And it doesn't. So here is Prince Shechem, probably a younger man, but as verse 19 indicates, a very powerful man, a leader within his family. He saw her, verse 2 says. Was she drinking with the woman of the land? Was she dancing with the woman of the land? Was she partying with the woman of the land. He saw her, and with his power and influence, he wanted her, and what he wants, the prince gets. There's a lot in this story that points to rape rather than fornication. The terms it used in quick succession: he saw her, he seized her, he lay with her, he humiliated her in verse 2, are all pointing to something more than a casual physical connection. In verse 7, the brothers call what happened an outrageous thing, used elsewhere in the Old Testament of outrageous physical sexuality. The strength of anger of the brothers and the level of revenge by the brothers indicates that Dinah did not give consent to what happened here. In this whole chapter, her voice is never heard. She's suppressed, and indeed in verse 26 we learn that all the time she is kept in Shechem's house, is all pointing to an outrageous physical assault on Dinah. Verse 31, he is treating our sister like a prostitute. He saw her. He took her. And in using those words, even in this dark opening paragraph of our chapter, this skilled writer, this skilled theologian, he's pulling you and I into the paragraph. He wants you and I to see ourselves in this paragraph, because these words, saw and took, go right back to the Garden of Eden, when Eve saw the forbidden fruit and took the forbidden fruit. Here is the essence of sin. It will be heard again in Achan as he sees the forbidden objects and takes the forbidden objects. It will be heard again in David as he looks from his palace roof and he sees the woman bathing, and then he takes the woman into his home. Seeing and taking are used deliberately, not that we'll be bystanders tut-tutting at what's going on here, but we'll be finding ourselves in this paragraph, and we'll be humbled before the Almighty God that we too are sinners who see and who take. We're coming to a time of year when families will overspend, when they will see and be dazzled and pulled in and magnetized towards things that they should leave well alone, but they will take and overspend. And 4 million people in the United Kingdom will purchase their festive goods on credit because they cannot resist seeing and taking. And so we're being challenged here not to stare at, not to linger over, not to study with our vision objects that will make us sin, but to look away to Christ, to God, to grace, to heaven, to our mortality. The sin of desire. Secondly, Hamor went out in verse 6. The sin of deception. Now it seems that Shechem was young, though respected in verse number 19, and so as customary, his father goes to arrange this marriage between himself and his family and Jacob and his family. So Shechem, it's asserted here, has this inkling, this longing, this desire for Dinah. You see the growth and intensity of the language in verse 3. He's drawn to her. Verse 3, he loved her. Verse 3, he spoke tenderly to her. All of this sounds sincere and honest and right, but I doubt it. I doubt it because there's other things in the chapter that are militating against this being true love. This is, I would argue, lust instead of love. In verse 4, for example, he speaks dismissively of Dinah. Get me this girl to wife. He keeps her in his house in verse 26. He doesn't let her speak at all in all of these conversations. Hamor, in his speech in verses 8 to 10, he builds up Shechem's affection for Dinah. Perhaps they're trying to militate the anger and the resentment and the hatred that they are beginning to discern within Jacob's family and among his sons. Shechem suggests that he will pay any bride price for Dinah. But there's no apology here. There's no confession of sin. He was a prince in the land, and what he wanted, he would get. But Dinah, I judge, would be cast aside within 6 months. But even behind this superficial assertion of love, which I'm saying is lust, that there is a whole scheming involved in Hamor's approach to the sons of Jacob. He wants the two tribes to join together, to intermarry, to become one people, he argues. But he's not seeking equality between the tribe of Jacob and his own tribe. Rather, what he's desiring is a takeover. And he says this as he tries to sell his schemes to the city of Shechem in verse 23. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts become ours? He's speaking as if this was true love. He's speaking as if in sincerity he wants a unification of the Jacobites and the Hivites. But underneath it all, he knows that they have the power and the resources to amass great wealth and fortune for themselves. Here is the sin of deceit. And the hurtful thing is, and the dangerous thing here is that marriage between a young man and a young woman is being used to promote this deceit. And what a lesson here for the young people in our church and for parents as we guide our young people through relationships to ask the question that cries out to us from this chapter. Is it love? Or is it lust? Does that man or that girl truly love me or lust after me? Do I truly love him or just lust after him? He's handsome. She's beautiful. He's rich. She's successful. Is it love or is it lust? And this chapter is appealing to us, is warning us, is showing us the dangers that surround going down the wrong pathway here, which many young people have gone down. The second sin of deception is in verses 13 to 24. Went out is used of the people of the city of Shechem. In verse 24. This time it's not the deception of Hamor and the Hivites, But this time it's the deception of the sons of Jacob. They come in from the field, verse 7. Perhaps Jacob sent a messenger to them to come home, and they know the news before they get home, and on their way home they're able to discuss, what are we going to do? And so when they turn up to this meeting with Hamor, they have an idea of what must happen. They're angry. And they prepare a strategy of revenge. So they claim the marriage cannot go ahead because Shechem, Prince Shechem, is a non-Jew, and citing perhaps the case of Isaac and the case of Jacob, who went and married those who became Jews. They're citing this case that this cannot take place without the Hivites receiving the sign of the Jew. Rather than having a reverent or a religious connotation or desiring the conversion of these Hivites into the laws and religion and relationship with God, these sons of Jacob are misusing this Old Testament sacrifice for their own ends and means, and to secure revenge on the Hivites people. But Shechem and Hamor accept this. They see the dollar signs flashing in their mind, the riches that lie before them as they swamp the sons of Jacob and take all their possessions and further their own kingdom and their own cause. And even before the town council meets, the prince of Shechem has received the sign of the Jews. 19th century, an excavation of Shechem was conducted, and they found that this was a walled city of about 1,000 inhabitants. Shechem and Hamor meet with the town council. They use different skills to persuade them of the benefits of accepting this small cost, this small price of having the Jewish sign, and then the luxury and wealth and power that they will then possess. And the men of the city who went out, the text says, agreed to this. They were not just the able-bodied who could walk in and out of the city and do business and head off to trade in other parts, but this is a technical term for the armed men who went out of the city to battle. And it was them in particular that the Jacobites focused on, to reduce their ability to defend themselves when the moment of attack would come. These men of the city who went out to battle. The sin of deception. And one of the elements of the cunningness of the Jacobites here in this, the commentators use this phrase, I know it's got other connotations in history. The sons of Jacob then, okay, the sons of Jacob here is that they misused the Old Testament sacrament to further their cause. And there's got to be applications for us, isn't there? There's got to be a warning here for us. Here's the Old Testament church, the sons of Jacob, misusing an Old Testament sacrament to achieve their dastardly end. With teaching that if you take communion, you will get into heaven, be a way of misusing a New Testament sacrament. Teaching baptismal regeneration, that when a child is baptized, they are born again. Is that a way of the church misusing a New Testament sacrament? Of allowing people to come to the Lord's table who shouldn't be there, and of not allowing people to come to the Lord's table who should be there? Is that misusing a New Testament sacrament? They deceive the Hivites, but they do it in a wrong way. Lastly, the sin of destruction. They went out, and it's translated differently here, I know. The sons of Jacob went out to take their revenge. Especially verse 26, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. Same Hebrew words. There's two phases to their destruction of the Hivites, both announced by the phrase, they came upon. They came upon. Verse number 27, the sons of Jacob came upon the slain. In verse 25, Simeon and Levi took their swords and came against or upon the city while it felt secure. On the third day, when their opponents were weak, they came upon and took their revenge. Simeon and Levi were blood brothers of Dinah. They must have taken their servants with them. About 200 of the inhabitants would have been armed men. And they entered the city and killed all the armed men, and Hamor and Shechem. And throughout this description of their revenge on the people of Shechem, the word took keeps coming up, and it's for an obvious reason, isn't it? See it in verse 25. They took their swords. In verse number 26, they took Dinah, who was imprisoned in the prince's house. In verse number 28, they took the sheep and the oxen and the wives and the little ones. And it's all because of verse 1 that the prince took Dinah. He took someone precious from them, so they took from him. And the second phase, in verse 27 to 29, includes not just Simeon and Levi, but includes the sons of Jacob. You see the change in verse number 27, the sons of Jacob. Once the men had been killed, then this second phase of the sons of Jacob came into the city to strip the dead, to take the wealth of their robes, their precious goods, their flocks and families as slaves and servants. And as Jacob reflects on this and the distress that has come to him, he focuses only on the actions of Simeon and Levi. But it's interesting, perhaps, that the writer and recorder of this event gives 36 words to the first phase and 37 Hebrew words to the second phase. In the writer's estimate, it seems that both parties were in error in what they did, not just Simeon and Levi in the first phase. Jacob's trembling again now. He's afraid once again that he's going to be annihilated, that the tribes of the nations will gather together and gang up against him as they did in Joshua chapter 9 and verses 1 and 2. And he's forgetting once more the promises of God and his plan to bring blessing to the nations through the sons of Jacob. Using a sledgehammer to crack a nut is using too much force than is necessary to deal with an issue. Sending 50 police officers to arrest 2 unarmed men is using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. That's the idea here. The massacre of the men of Shechem, the enslavement of this city and their goods, was far beyond what God's law later would command. Deuteronomy 22 verses 28 and 29 deal with a similar scenario to this chapter, and it sets out the punishment for those involved in this situation. The man involved should marry the woman. The man involved should pay a price to the woman's husband. The man involved could never divorce that woman whom he had violated. The element of confusion in this case is that the man is a pagan outside of the nation of the Jews. And commentators suggest that perhaps the just punishment would have been his death, but not the slaughter of all the men of the city. And so it's a warning. It's a warning to us, isn't it, that when a family relation has been grieved and sinned against, that we contain our revenge, our attitudes, our thoughts. The Old Testament maxim is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And it's a limiting maxim to keep us to keep us contained, that we won't go overboard because of the emotions involved in family members being hurt and grieved and treated badly. These men took a head for an eye and went far beyond the principles of God's methods. So sin is here. God's not mentioned. The promises are not mentioned. The blessings are not mentioned. The sin of desire is here. The sin of deceit is here in a double way. The sin of destruction is here in graphic terms. But so is God's grace. And even in this darkest of chapters, the light of the gospel shines in verse 25, in this phrase, on the third day. This is a phrase that occurs numerous times in the book of Genesis. And as I've looked at it, I've discovered that a lot of theologians have written about this, and there's articles all over the place on this phrase, on the third day. We'll come to it in our studies of the life of Joseph at some point, God willing, that he revealed himself to his brothers on the third day. We've come across it again in relation to Laban, that they told Laban Jacob had gone on the third day. In Genesis chapter 22, Abraham and Isaac, they're going up the mountain, and on the third day, he offers Isaac. In Exodus chapter 19, God will come down on Mount Sinai in thunder and lightning on the third day. Jonah later on in the Old Testament is vomited up in the dry land on the third day. And it becomes a phrase in which mighty redemptive actions occur. This is the time for God to work, not just on the first day of the week, but on the third day. This is the big day for God to do things that are amazing and powerful. And right throughout the Old Testament, this phrase comes up again and again, and it's burning itself into our minds, so that when Jesus in Matthew 16 to 18 starts to tell his disciples about his great redemptive action, he says to them 3 times, I'm going to be betrayed into the hands of sinners. I'm going to be delivered over to the Gentiles and be crucified. And on the third day, I will rise again. So as we go home tonight, we think of our sins, our seeing and taking, our deceit, our overreacting in times of anger and revenge. We come to the cross. We bow down before Christ. We thank him that he died for us, and that on the third day he rose again.